bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Da-da-da-da-dum, etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant agreed. My superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Morning. In just a moment, I'm going to be speaking to Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick about the small boats crisis, and then former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will be joining me in the studio. Did his mini-budget play a part in the UK's highest interest rate in 15 years? Stay tuned for that. And also, I'll be speaking to John Redwood, who's Margaret Thatcher's former policy advisor, and I'm going to be having Stephen Timms down the line with me to talk about what Blair would do about the economy and whether Labour's ideas are any good. So let's first of all just go through the front pages of the newspapers. Let's have a look at this first one in the Sunday Telegraph. China will use electric cars to spy on Britain. That's the first one. The Sunday Times. Iranian state now bigger threat to UK. That's from Suella Braverman, who's saying that Iran now is posing a threat to us from a terror point of view. The Observer, appalling state of warehouse jails revealed in shock data. That's an expose that the paper has done about jails and that they're not really fit for purpose. The Mail on Sunday this weekend goes with fat cat's cash in no cost of living squeeze. So that's about all of the big bosses of the energy firms making far too much money from us. Sabotage, says the Sunday Express, and they're carrying that interview with Suella Braverman. She's given it to the Mail on Sunday, but the Sunday Express are picking up on the fact that she's blaming Labour and Labour cronies for the lawyers who are stopping the boats at the moment and not allowing the government to get on with their Rwanda plans. And then we've got here, Harry Deal to film £3 million book. That does sound like a story about him bringing out another autobiography. I can reassure you it's not that. Apparently, Harry and Meghan are going to bring a romance novel to life on film. And then we've got, in the Sunday Mirror, Jamie, act now on free school meals. He's saying that children should have free school meals out of term time because if they're not poor enough, they need help in term time, then they also need it when they're on the holidays, basically. Now, I'm delighted to bring in my paper reviewer extraordinaire, my fellow GB News presenter, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, lovely to see you this morning. Let's talk about this Suella interview. She's in the Mail on Sunday. Everyone else has picked up on it across the whole of the newspapers, basically. And she's having a go at Labour. She's accusing Labour of sabotaging the government's Stop the Boats plan. What do you make of that, Nigel?
I think it's a way of actually shifting blame for her own failures. I mean, when you actually delve into the sort of small print there, it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. They particularly focus in on a lawyer who works for Labour and also works for another organisation trying to stop the Rwanda plan going ahead. But this particular lawyer spends 90% of her time on a panel with Priti Patel on Windrush. So
hang on, Nigel. You've got to admit that there are people on the left that support these lawyers who are effectively trying to make any claim to come and live in the UK an asylum claim. And it's not always the case. We had that Mail expose of those lawyers basically saying, oh, well, if you want to claim asylum, you've got to pretend to be persecuted by that person. Oh, your backstory doesn't stand up. Tell these lies, then you'll be able to get in. She's got a point, hasn't she? If you were Home Secretary, you'd be so frustrated by these people gaming the system.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got lawyers cheating, if you've got lawyers telling lies, which seems to be what is happening in that particular case, I think Suella Braverman is absolutely right that, first of all, they should be struck off, and secondly, if they've committed a criminal offence, they should be jailed, which is what she's saying this morning. So I think you need to park those people. I mean, this is actually crooked behaviour from people who are legitimately challenging government immigration policy, which is not working.
But isn't it right for her to suggest that in stopping that Jamaica flight from taking off, actually Keir Starmer did conspire in keeping a rapist and murderer in the country to go off and commit more crimes?
Well, I mean, if you start with flights like that, there are an awful lot of questions there about whether or not those are a good idea. Do you, for instance, deport people who have been in this country since they were children? They've grown up here. I mean, there were a load of questions to answer. I'm not saying that is right, but if you're a foreign criminal,
most people listening and watching this will go, yeah, can you please?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the general principle should be that foreign criminals should go home, and just because they're going to Jamaica, it's not racist. If they could round up a plane load of white Australians, they'd be sent back too.
Yeah, OK, fair enough. Look, we've got the Suella row, which is dominating the front pages, and then, of course, we've got more talk of net zero. I'm calling it net hero to net zero, because everyone's now abandoning their quest for net zero by 2050. It seems to me as if Starmer's in a confused place. Sunak is very much now saying, OK, let's put the brakes on this. Interestingly, echoing, of all people, Priti Patel on my show last week, who said, let's put a pause on this. It's making the poor poorer. Do you agree with that analysis, Nigel?
No, what I think has happened is they've all gone wobbly after Uxbridge.
Yes.
That suddenly Uxbridge comes along, bad by-election result, a weird by-election result, and they all say, ooh, this whole net zero thing is a bit dodgy, perhaps we ought to bring our targets back. So what is interesting is you've got Therese Coffey now saying, hey, look, please, guys, hold your nerve, because this is really important.
Yeah, this is interesting from Therese. I mean, we know that she'd come from that position, right, because she's Environment Secretary. She needs to be on the side of the Greens in many respects. But then we've got some polling in the Sunday Express that suggests that, at least from the electorate's point of view, they're not happy with this. They're not happy to be told that they need to pay thousands to replace petrol and diesels with electrics, to replace boilers with heat pumps. So the public doesn't like net zero by 2050, does it?
Well, apparently they do. This is what's so weird about the public at the moment. So, for instance, if you look at at most polling, the 4 top issues that concern voters are cost of living comes number 1, NHS number 2, immigration number 3, and then climate change. So they do want something done about it. Trouble is, what they don't want is if that's something that has to be done is a pylon outside their front door, or suddenly they're paying the cost of ULEZ, for instance. That's where the problem lies. I think that we need now to convince people it will cost us all. If we really believe in net zero, if we believe in climate change, we need to do something about it pretty much now.
Would ULEZ be more acceptable to people if it was, say, a £5? I mean, the other suspicion around it is Sadiq Khan's policy is to plug an enormous black hole in his own finances, and that's the only reason why it's happening. You look at LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods. Had Martin Townsend on here doing the papers last week. He was talking about 2 cameras in Chiswick that had made the council 13 million. So people are also sceptical about what are the motivations. Is it about air quality or is it about filling Sadiq Khan's coffers?
Yeah, and I think that the way that Sadiq Khan should have approached it was, say, start at £2.50 and gradually build up to that £12.50 cost. It's a lot of money. I mean, the other thing at the moment is that he needs to extend his scrappage scheme, and he needs to pay for it outside London. It is not fair on a nurse who lives in, say, Kent or Essex, who works in a London hospital, having to then pay...
and probably, by the way, paying for parking when she's at the hospital. We all know about
that
parking
too.
charges.
And she won't be able to get a scrappage scheme at the moment. So
which makes no sense. And it's the same for electricians and plumbers. I mean, apparently they're being offered up to £9.5 grand to change vans, but they're probably already coping with fewer customers.
But only if they live in London. The whole point is that it's the people who border onto other counties who never voted for the London mayor or this policy who are being hit by it.
Got it. People outside that scrappage needs to be extended to them. I think that's also Angela Rayner's argument with regard to unaffordability. Let's move on to what I'm describing as trans hocus pocus. Tell me about what's happened now to J.K. Rowling.
Well, she's been cancelled again, and this time it's by the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle.
Right.
And they've got a Harry Potter exhibition, but what they've done is they removed any reference to J.K. Rowling from it. Now, goodness knows how you tell the story of Harry Potter without its creator, Jo Rowling. And I'm always against this. Look, I don't agree with Joanna Rowling about the whole trans issue. I think she's wrong, but she's...
Wrong that biological sex is immutable.
Yes, yes.
OK. Are you in the women can have a penis camp then, Nigel?
Yes, I am.
Right,
and that, bear in mind, is the legal and official position in this country.
OK. I mean, I'm in the J.K. Rowling camp.
OK.
But at the same time, I agree with you. The Telegraph have done this story, and actually they've done a lot of work generally on kind of airbrushing history, changing Roald Dahl retrospectively. You can't write J.K. Rowling out of her own books.
No, that's right. And so she is an integral part of the Harry Potter story. You kind of a museum exhibition that doesn't include her.
No, it's
But
nonsense.
then she should not be cancelled full stop wherever she is, that she's perfectly entitled to her views.
Yeah, can we just stop cancelling people and just allow people to disagree, agree?
Free speech.
I mean, you know, that's only what this entire channel is all about.
Exactly.
But if only the rest of the world would listen. I like that you've pointed out photo of the day is in the Mail on Sunday. Tell me about this. From 2022's scorched earth to 2023's green and pleasant land.
Yeah, I mean, this is a number of pictures around the place to see what has actually happened between...
Oh, there it is there. So you've got that picture of that fountain and it's completely scorched last year. And then today, it's lovely and green because we've had so much rain.
Exactly, and this is the kind of summer that we're having at the moment.
Then you were in Rhodes, so you've experienced scorched earth.
That we escaped Rhodes with minutes to spare before they closed the roads as the fires were coming towards us, and the temperatures were really hot. I mean,
but you could forgive people for thinking, well, we're not really experiencing high temperatures here.
No, we're not.
Is it right to say that we're all boiling alive?
Well, I think so. If you look at this is a global thing. thing.
Yeah.
4 records have been broken this year. So we've had the hottest June on record.
Yeah.
We've had the hottest day on record. We've got sea ice in the Antarctic melting at record levels.
And the oceans apparently hotter than they've ever been, according
And
to
the oceans hotter than they've ever been. So at the moment, suddenly climate change, which seemed a long way off, is now on our doorstep and urgent.
Yeah.
OK, we're not seeing it this summer, but later on in August, who knows?
Who knows? Thank you very much, Nigel Nelson, for joining me this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Now, Olivia Otley is by the seaside. She's in Bournemouth. Olivia, I've got Robert Jenrick coming on. I'm going to be speaking to Kwasi Kwarteng. I've got John Redwood. I've got Stephen Timms, who used to be Blair's Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Let me know, please, what questions your panel have got for today's guests.
Hello, yes, we are here in lovely sunny Bournemouth this morning, and we've got a fantastic People's panel who've been researching your guests and have got some really very searching questions that I think you'll want to ask them. We're in the Naked Cafe today near the beach in Bournemouth, and this is the manager, Lena. Lena, thank you so much for having us here today. We're really, really grateful. And how are you finding businesses going for you at the moment?
It's going pretty well. We have a lot of students at the moment in Bournemouth area, which means that a lot of them are coming into our place with very, most of our demographics is students, young professionals, so we're doing pretty well, yes, at the moment.
That's really good to hear, and I can tell that we're bustling already very early on a Sunday morning. And are there any problems that your business is experiencing that perhaps the government could help out with?
So most probably the only thing, like most of the small businesses, we have seen enormous increase in our prices for the products. We haven't put our pricing up because we want to make sure that we still have the same regular customers, people are looked after. So our profit margins have dropped, which means that we need to work so much harder. We need to have more footfall to stay profitable. So yeah, that's the only thing I would say, our biggest challenge at the moment.
Thank you very much. I think that's a big problem for lots of small businesses with the inflation crisis at the moment. Very hard to know how to handle it. But thank you so much for having us here today, and it's really good to hear that business is going well. And here is our fantastic People's panel. This morning we have got Dave and we've got Steve. Steve, I'm going to start with you because I know you've got some really good questions for Camilla's guests this morning. What are they?
My first question is, the government have got 5 priorities. I've got a housing background. Everybody seems to accept that there's a housing crisis, but housing's not on their 5 priority lists. Interest rates are going up. All the people on variable mortgages are going to have their payments go up. Private renters are already seeing extremely high rents and they're going to go up even more. When are all these people going to see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel with things coming down and that light not being yet another oncoming train?
Thank you very much. I think there'll be lots of people with mortgages who will be feeling exactly the same and asking similar questions to themselves. And Dave, what about you? What are your questions for Camilla's politicians today?
So I've got 3 questions for 3 of the politicians. The first one to Stephen Timms would be, in light of what happened at the Prime Minister's residence last week, in which Greenpeace activists stormed his home, and as soon as that happened, the Environmental Secretary ordered her department to shun all ties with Greenpeace. So I would ask Stephen Timms from the Labour Party whether he would do the same for Just Stop Oil, bearing in mind that an entrepreneur called Dale Vince has donated £1.5 million to the Labour Party, but also donates money to Just Stop Oil. So there's an alignment for the Labour Party there. So I'd like to see what he said. My second question would be to Robert Jenrick, obviously on immigration. So I'd like to ask him why he's maintaining government pull factors, which is fueling the immigration problem and people come across the channel. And even on the UK Gov website, there's a shopping list of items and benefits that immigrants would be entitled to. So I believe that's a big pull factor. And my final question to Kwasi Kwarteng would be, when he issued his mini-budget, it was shunned by the Bank of England and it spooked the money markets. So I would ask Kwasi Kwarteng if he believes that the Bank of England, due to their 2 or 3 most recent forecast inaccuracies, whether he believes the Bank of England should still remain independent.
Thank you very much, both of you. Those are really excellent questions, which I'm sure Camilla will be asking our politicians on the show later. We'll be watching with a hawk eye back here in Bournemouth to see what they have to say. But for now, back over to you in the studio.
Panel next week, go to gbnews.com/panel. Let's bring in one of our guests now, because I'm delighted to be joined by the Labour MP for East Ham since 1994, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. Sir Stephen Timms joins me. Lovely to see you this morning, Stephen. Let's get straight into some of the debates in today's paper about immigration. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, basically accusing Keir Starmer of conspiring with those trying to stop the government from stopping illegal immigration, making a reference to that flight that he campaigned to not take off, that Jamaica flight. One of the people on the flight went on to commit a crime against somebody in the UK. Is Keir Starmer facilitating the retention of rapists and murderers in this country?
No. I mean, Suella Braverman is right that her plans aren't working, but that's because they were very bad plans. They've been badly thought through. They conflict with the law in various respects, and therefore they're not working. I mean, it's understandable she's trying to find someone else to blame, but the responsibility is in fact entirely hers.
But isn't the Labour Party on the side of those lawyers, as Braverman suggests? We've got a Labour councillor who is somebody that campaigns to try and keep people in the country who perhaps don't have the right to claim asylum here. So isn't Labour on the side of those so-called lefty lawyers that are trying to thwart the government's plans?
No, this is entirely the Home Secretary trying to find someone else to blame for her own failures. She needs to take responsibility. She's right, her policies are not working. She needs to fix the policies, not just blame somebody else.
And what's Labour's solution then? Because presumably if you think that it's wrong that Suella Braverman's plans are being thwarted by anyone, that by consequence means that you're quite happy to have quite robust policies to stop the boats, to stop people claiming asylum here that don't deserve to claim asylum.
Yeah, we do need to stop the boats. That's absolutely right. And the government needs to come up with a plan that will succeed, unlike the plans they've put in place so far, which are not working.
But how would you deter people, Sir Stephen?
Is now accepting. We need to do that by having a better relationship with France in particular, and negotiate proper restrictions and controls at the French end. Yeah. We also do need to make sure that it is legally possible for people who are entitled to claim asylum in the UK to come here, other than coming by a boat across the Channel. At the moment, there's no legal means for them to do it. So, for example, if there's a child, perhaps from Africa, who's in France, who is legally entitled to come and join their sibling, their brother or their sister, who's got asylum status in the UK, there's no way for them to do that. There need to be some routes. The government has said they will introduce some legal routes. They haven't done that yet. Until there are, people are going to carry on desperately trying to get across the Channel in these terrible small boats. That needs to be fixed.
There may be an argument that we've paid millions to the French and indeed that there are already legal routes in play. But let's move on to net zero now, because that's also a theme of today's newspapers. One of my panellists on the People's Panel there wanted me to ask you about Just Stop Oil. We've seen Greenpeace scaling the Prime Minister's home in Richmond in the north. We've got Just Stop Oil now threatening to completely disrupt all of the football fixtures just about starting in the Premier League this weekend. Surely now it's time for Labour to break ties with Just Stop Oil, to not take Dale Vince's money, because these people are wreaking havoc and bringing misery to thousands of sports fans.
Well, I think it is pretty extraordinary that Greenpeace was able to walk into the Prime Minister's home and scale the roof. That was a very serious security lapse. That should not have happened. But Greenpeace does have a point in the arguments that it's making. I do not support the tactics of Just Stop Oil, but they also have a point in the case that they are arguing. And the Prime Minister's announcement that we're just going to have an extra 100 licences for more oil and gas prospecting in the North Sea is the wrong decision. We do need, with the rest of the world, to tackle the climate crisis. And what he's done is going absolutely in the wrong direction and giving up what has until now been quite an impressive UK lead on this area, from the COP conference in Glasgow and so on. Rishi Sunak, I think in a sort of measure of panic, seems to have thrown all that away in the hope that he can get a few votes by going in the opposite direction.
But you were the Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Tony Blair. I'm wondering whether you think it is a good idea for Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves to announce £28 billion in spending on a green prosperity pledge when we found out this week that household debt is at £2 trillion. It's £71,000 per household. So surely a next Labour government, if that's going to happen, is going to be spending money, cashing cheques that it simply can't afford.
Well, that's what we saw with the Kwasi Kwarteng budget, which I'm sure you're going to ask Kwasi about in a minute, when he announced huge tax cuts and no means to pay for them. But I think actually Rachel Reeves has been absolutely right throughout all of this debate. And in particular, she's right to insist that everything a Labour government will do has to be built on the rock of fiscal responsibility.
Well, 28 billion spending a year isn't fiscally responsible, is it?
No, it definitely is. The plan is highly fiscally responsible. Of course, the government will continue to invest, and that's always happens and needs to happen. And at the moment, we do have to rebuild the economy after this terrible, stagnant lack of growth that we're in at the moment. So we've got to invest. We've got to rebuild the British economy, but it's got to be on the basis of fiscal responsibility, and that is the watchword of everything that Rachel Reeves has been saying over the last couple of years, and I very much agree with her.
Why did she have to water down the plans then? She looked at the plans and then she realised that she couldn't afford them. So that's not fiscally responsible, that's fiscally illiterate, isn't it?
No, that is fiscally responsible. That's why she said it's got to be phased in a fiscally responsible way, and she's absolutely right to do that.
Mr Timms, if you don't mind me asking, just because it might still be on the public's conscience that obviously you had this terrible thing happen to you in 2010 where you were stabbed by one of your constituents, Roshanarana Chowdhury. She's in prison now, and I just was researching this interview and I thought it was really interesting from your perspective as a Christian that you wanted to reach out to her. She obviously nearly killed you, but you said that you wanted to meet her in prison and perhaps discuss the case. Did you ever make contact with her personally?
Well, I have been in a restorative justice process. Unfortunately, it seems to have stalled. I don't know why. It's got stuck in red tape somewhere, and it doesn't seem to be moving forward at the moment. But I'm still hoping that somebody in the Ministry of Justice might finally, get things moving, and it might be possible, but it hasn't been yet.
So explain that to me, Mr Timms. You've wanted to reach out to this prisoner and try and have a conversation with her to try and get some closure, but the MOJ have stood in the way. Would you be willing to go and see her in prison then?
Yeah, we've been talking about that, and I understood that things were moving in that direction, but it's stalled for reasons that I don't understand. She actually wrote to me. She sent me 3 letters, so that was sort of how this began, and I'm very happy to go into a process which I thought was going to lead to the possibility of a meeting, but it hasn't, and I'm not sure what's happening now.
Have you been able to forgive her?
Well, I think if I met her, that may well be possible, but without some sort of communication, I don't think that would really mean anything.
OK, so Stephen Timms, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lots more to come on today's show. In just a minute, I'll be speaking to the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick. When will the government take back control of our borders? I know you'll want to hear his plans to stop the boats and manage the asylum seeker crisis. We'll have all that and more to come after the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. Well, today will be more of a day of sunshine and showers with lighter winds around than what we saw yesterday. Yesterday's storm Anthony is already moving away to the southeast but could still bring some cloud and blustery conditions to parts of East Anglia through this morning. Elsewhere, we'll see cloud and showers soon bubbling up, and these could be heavy in a few places across Scotland, Northern England, and with a chance of the odd thunderstorm across Northern Ireland. We're feeling much more pleasant today as well compared to yesterday, with those temperatures just creeping into the low 20s in the south. Now, as we go through the rest of this afternoon and into the evening, we'll see those showers starting to ease, becoming more confined to northern areas, and plenty of clear spells around. Now, with clear spells and lighter winds, we'll see those temperatures dropping just a little bit more readily tonight. So towns and cities generally clinging on to those double figures, but more widely seeing temperatures into the mid-single figures in rural areas. This will mean it'll be a bright but chilly start to the new week. Plenty of sunshine around. There could still be the odd shower developing, heaviest across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. But with those light winds and that sunshine around, feeling even more pleasant as we go into the new week, with those temperatures just starting to climb a little bit more into the 20s, with a high of 23 in the southeast.
The temperature's rising.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. In just a moment, I'm going to be speaking to Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick about the small boats crisis, and then former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will be joining me in the studio. Did his mini-budget play a part in the UK's highest interest rate in 15 years? Stay tuned for all that after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Camilla, thank you, and good morning to you. The top story from the GB newsroom today. Those who've been wrongfully convicted of crimes will no longer have their living costs docked from their compensation payments. New guidance issued by Justice Secretary Alex Chalk comes into immediate effect today. And, of course, it follows the controversy sparked by the jailing of Andrew Malkinson, who spent 17 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. He voiced his concerns that expenses may be deducted from his compensation, prompting Downing Street to make urgent amendments. Well, in international news today, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of bombing a blood transfusion centre in the northwest of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky claims a number of people have died and others have been injured, but the president didn't disclose how many fatalities there were. He described the airstrike in eastern Kharkiv region as a war crime. So far, there's been no comment from Russia. Back here at home, the National Crime Agency is teaming up with social media firms to crack down on posts by people smugglers who are encouraging asylum seekers to cross the English Channel. The Prime Minister says the new partnership between law enforcement agencies and the tech giants will tackle attempts to lure migrants into paying to make the journey. Group discounts, free spaces for children and offers of false documents are among some of the social media posts that Rishi Sunak wants removed to help achieve his promise to stop the boats. Labour says, though, the action is too little, too late. Storm Anthony saw strong winds hit some parts of the UK yesterday, and it blocked about 100 miles of railway between Exeter and Penzance in Cornwall. About half a month's worth of rain fell on some areas in the southwest, with a number of people evacuated from their homes in North Yorkshire as well due to flooding there. Gusts of wind of up to 78 miles an hour measured as well at Bury Head in Devon, while 43 millimetres of rain fell in Scarborough in North Yorkshire. But despite a bit of rain on the parade, if we can put it like that, Brighton's Pride celebrations carried on yesterday. Things did come to an abrupt stop, though, last night when a band was left on stage without any sound. That band, the Black Eyed Peas, nonetheless, were forced to end their set early when the sound cut out, and it left fans to carry on the singing. Yesterday's event was hit by those train cancellations as well as the wet and windy weather caused by Storm Anthony, but trains are now back up and running for day 2 of the event. Meanwhile, heavy rains forced the cancellation of Newcastle's Loose Fest yesterday and today, which had been expected to attract around 60,000 people. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, because I'm about to speak to Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. I'm then going to be joined in the studio by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng to discuss Thursday's interest rate rise by the Bank of England. Is Trussonomics to blame? Let's ask him that. I'm also going to be speaking to Sir John Redwood, the veteran Tory MP who headed Margaret Thatcher's policy unit. And I'll be speaking to the economist Roger Bootle about the state of the British economy. But first, let's bring Robert Jenrick into the conversation now. He's the Immigration Minister and the MP for Newark. Robert, lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you for coming on. We've heard the Home Secretary speaking in very bullish terms about the immigration policy and the fact that she thinks that Labour have been letting down the country, that Keir Starmer is siding with the lefty lawyers who are stopping deportations of rapists and murderers. You're big on talk, but not on action, Robert, because as Labour point out, you've sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than actual deportees.
Well, good morning, Camilla. Well, we want to send more people to Rwanda. We want to get that scheme up and running. It is unfortunately being stuck in the courts at the moment, but that's not the totality of our plan. We're working on many other fronts at the same time. We've signed a brilliant deal with Albania that's reduced the number of people crossing from Albania from 30% this time last year to 4% today. We're working with France, with Italy, with other countries to make sure that we have stronger defences on the northern French coast. And here in the UK, we're making it much more difficult for people to work illegally, to get housing illegally, and to make a life here, as well as, of course, making sure that when illegal migrants do come here, they are accommodated in appropriate but simple accommodation, not the luxurious hotels that members of the public are rightly angry about and want to see us get out of as quickly as possible.
I know the Bibi Stockholm is going to start taking migrants from tomorrow. Rishi Sunak mentioned 2 cruise ships that were going to be used. What's happened to them? Apparently no port wants to take the migrants there.
Well, you're right to say that the first barge will be operational within the coming days, and that's an important step forward. I hope that will be seen as a successful way of housing people, as I say, in decent
What
but
about the
never
cruise ships,
luxurious
though?
accommodation. And we're in conversation with a number of other ports and hoping that we can secure those very soon. It's true that a couple of ports did back out, mostly because local Labour councils, like in Birkenhead and in Leith in Edinburgh, refused to support us.
Okay.
Very hypocritically, actually. If you look at the Leith example, that's a Labour council that had housed Ukrainian refugees on the same barge, same boat, but refused to house asylum seekers all the time, saying that they were a city of sanctuary and wanted more asylum seekers.
Is it Labour's fault that your immigration policy isn't working then?
No, but I think it's worth pointing out that Labour would be much, much worse. Labour's plan would actually see large numbers of people crossing the channel, even larger than there are today, because they just think you can grant your way out of this problem. They think that you can make
2,000 migrants crossing the channel in June.
Well, we want to see those numbers come down. I mean, as of today, the numbers are significantly lower than they were this time last year, about 15% lower. But of course, that's just the beginning. We want to see a substantial reduction. We want to stop the boats. And that's why we're taking the measures that we are. That's why we passed the Illegal Migration Act just a few weeks ago, which is probably the most robust piece of legislation on immigration in my lifetime.
Suella Braverman's talked about these lefty lawyers. There was an expose in the Daily Mail where they went undercover. They filmed immigration lawyers basically telling clients to game the system. What should happen then? Because you're talking the talk on these lawyers, but should they be issued with even bigger fines? Talking about 5% of their earnings. Surely you need to fine them more than that and close them down.
Well, you should be struck off as a lawyer if you flagrantly abuse the law, and that is what I hope will happen to those solicitors and legal representatives who've been caught by the expose by the Daily Mail. The Solicitors Regulatory Authority is taking action against them and their firms. We're saying that we want that to continue. We want to fine individuals and firms appropriately. As a former solicitor, I have been shocked by the level of abuse that I've seen in this area of the law. I'm afraid that what you've seen so far is just the tip of
But are you saying that fellow lawyer Keir Starmer is conspiring with those lawyers? Is Keir Starmer and the Labour Party conspiring with those lawyers? Because that's what Rishi Sunak seems to be suggesting in the tweet he sent out last week, and that's what Suella Braverman seems to be suggesting. Are you also suggesting that?
Well, there is evidence of that, yes. I mean, just this week, we've seen an allegation that a Labour councillor in Newcastle, who is also a legal representative, was on TikTok apparently soliciting illegal migrants to come to her, and she would help them to stay in the UK. Now, I think that would be news to her residents in Newcastle, who probably want, like I do, secure borders and controlled migration. But it is an example of what the Labour Party really thinks. And as far as I can tell, absolutely nothing has been said or done with respect to that lady.
One of our people
wrong, and that shows what Labour, behind the mask, really think about this issue.
One of our People's panellists has made the point about the pull factors to the UK. There's a reason why people come from wherever they're coming from. They come across the whole of Europe and they still want to cross the channel to come to the UK because we're a soft touch, because we offer them too much, because we give them housing and accommodation, quite comfortable housing and accommodation, that they can come here and have a life that they can't live elsewhere. So some of the pull factors are to blame. Why don't you pull some of the pull factors?
Well, we are, Camilla. That's exactly the work that I've been doing over the last 6 months with Suella Braverman. We have changed the accommodation that people are staying in. The Labour Party say they don't like us using disused military sites and barges. They want hotels. And my postbag from Labour MPs is complaining that the accommodation isn't luxurious enough. They want us to spend more and offer more to illegal migrants. I don't think that's right. I think we have to make sure that the UK isn't perceived to be a soft touch. As you say, quite correctly, the overwhelming majority of those people coming on small boats are coming from France, from a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. They're choosing to come to the UK, and that must be in part because of a perception that the UK is a softer touch. That's why we're changing accommodation. That's why we're making it harder to live and to work illegally in the UK.
But
are these 50% rise in the number of raids this year by immigration enforcement to try and close down bogus employers?
But have you got control over some of these sites? Have you got control over some of these sites? Because we've got local reports of a TB and scabies outbreak at the site in Wethersfield. You've got constituents angry about migrants being housed in their doorstep. You've also got your own MPs really cross with you personally. I've heard a lot of criticism of you personally, Mr Jenrick, for the quote is dumping migrants in their seats and costing them their hopes of electoral success come 2024.
Well, the reason we're pursuing large sites and barges is so that we can exit the hotels. We don't want people staying in these hotels. They're very expensive and they're not appropriate. Of course, we understand that in the small number of places where these larger sites and barges are going to be located, that will pose problems and legitimate concerns for the community. And we're working very closely with councils and community groups in each of those places to try to mitigate that, providing extra money for the police and the health service, for example. But it must be right in the national interest that we house people, as other European countries do, incidentally, in large sites and on barges and vessels, rather than in hotels, which is just simply creating another pull factor to the United Kingdom.
Robert Jenrick, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm joined in the studio now by former Chancellor of the Exchequer and MP for Spelthorne, Kwasi Kwarteng. Lovely to speak to you.
Good to see you.
Can I just have a bit of reaction to that interview with Robert Jenrick? Because I think the perception from our audience is that you've got the right ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe this is actually akin to the mini budget. It's the right ideas, but it's the wrong execution, because people are listening to Jenrick and they'll be pulling their hair out going, we love the rhetoric on this, but we've still got 2,000 people arriving by Channel in the last month. There's no one being sent to Rwanda, and seemingly these immigration lawyers are running rings around Suella Braverman on this.
So actually, in contrast, I think, to the mini-budget, where I think, people rightly have said too much was done too quickly, the problem we've got here, and Robert has sort of alluded to it, is that there isn't enough action. And you mentioned that in your question. There isn't actually, there's the rhetoric, but there's no
So the government is failing the public on this?
So the issue there, and I think Suella Braverman mentioned this yesterday, or in the report mentioned today, is that you've got a very strong constituency of lawyers, many of them politically motivated, who are actively trying to frustrate what the government is doing.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem because
But it takes a newspaper sting to expose that.
Well, it was there before. I mean, it's always been.
But why isn't the government cracking down on these rogue agents?
Well, it wasn't. For example, it was the courts who said that the Rwanda policy, who essentially struck down the Rwanda policy.
Yeah.
And they've intervened against.
But maybe the
what the
Rwanda
government
policy
wants to
isn't
do.
workable because it's going to cost 170 grand per migrant to send anyone there. I mean, it's meant to act as a deterrent, but if 2,000 people are still arriving at the Channel last month, it's not got a deterrent factor at all.
No, but the people can see what's happening in the UK. They can see that the Supreme Court and other lawyers are actively working to frustrate what is a very well-known government policy. And that's what the government's running up against.
It's also the frustration, isn't it? Because people voted for Brexit thinking that we could take control of our borders and, by the way, our laws.
Sure.
So why can't we be in charge of who comes in and who doesn't? Why can't the government get a grip on this issue after 13 years in power?
Well, it has tried to do that, and it has passed legislation. But then you've got independent courts saying you can't do that, and that's a big problem, and that's something which I'm sure Rishi Sunak and Robert will be addressing.
Let's move on to the economy, because we had interest rate rise on Thursday, 5.25%. That's the highest rate in 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
Is that your fault?
No, I don't think it is. I think if you look at what's been happening, the inflation has been much higher for a lot longer than the Bank of England and others predicted. And the Bank of England have recognised themselves that they've got an issue here, because they've hired Ben Bernanke, who's an American economist, to look at their inflation models, because they realise...
Why can't they look at their own inflation? Is Andrew Bailey not fit for purpose?
Well, look,
does this man understand the effects of inflation?
No, so what they're doing is trying to get a very respected third party to look at how their inflation...
Doesn't that undermine the Bank of England governor?
Well, it's a serious... Yeah, you're right, it's a serious...
you're not confident in the Bank of England governor. Why can't you just say that?
You're right that it's a serious... matter for them to bring in someone else.
Do you have confidence in Bailey?
Look, I think I worked very well in my brief tenure with Andrew. I think he's a capable guy.
But you didn't see this calamity coming down the track.
Well, look,
you didn't see that inflation would be this high.
If you're getting,
so it's a major failure.
Sure. If you're getting an American economist, who I don't know what he knows about the UK, but if you're bringing him in to look at your inflation models, something's gone wrong.
Yeah. I mean, we brought a Canadian economist in.
Well, he was the governor of the bank. He was the governor of the bank.
He was the one who presided over ultra-low interest rates.
All of that.
Which have now come to, and quantitative easing on a mass scale, which have now cost us all in the pocket.
Well, that may be true, but I think in terms of the inflation and interest rates, I think it was a big fail in terms of working out where inflation might end up. And what's happened certainly since I've left office is that the bank is trying to play catch up. So having had very, very low rates, one forgets how low they were, 0.1%. And then they're now 5.25%, which is 52.5 times more.
So when people complain that they're paying 1,500 quid last year and now interest rates have risen to such an extent that then mortgages are now 2,500, do you have any sympathy with them?
Of course I do.
I mean, they're saying that they want kind of furlough-esque bailouts for mortgages.
Of course I do. I mean, probably I'm revealing too much. I'm on a tracker as well, so I'm affected by...
How far have your bills gone up?
They've gone up considerably.
So you're saying that you have been screwed by your own mini budget?
No, not at all, because Camilla, we're mixing two things.
OK.
The bank
I'm
is in
saying
charge
the perception is that the mini budget contributed to interest rates being pushed up as high as they are.
So
reaction to the inflation going up as high as
what I'm trying to say to you is that they're two different things. The Bank of England was in charge of inflation.
Yeah.
And a lot of my tracker rate and other people's tracker rates will be linked to the bank rate.
Yes.
And whatever margin that you have to pay. And the reason why interest rates have gone up very high is because we've completely missed the goal on the inflation.
Yeah.
We've totally misjudged inflation. And the point I was making about Ben Bernanke is that they brought someone in from America to look at their models because the models were clearly wrong.
How much has your mortgage bill gone up by per month?
A lot. I mean, I'm not going to
More than
reveal. A great deal since we bought the house in 2021.
Oh, OK.
So it's gone up quite a bit since then. And I'm as exposed to interest rates as anyone else.
With regard to growth, obviously you've talked a lot about stimulating growth. What would you like to see in the autumn statement from Chancellor Jeremy Hunt?
I think there has to be a growth plan. So it's all very well to people rightly or wrongly criticise the mini budget, and I think it was too much, too fast, or what have you. There are different perceptions about it, but the actual problem it was trying to solve, which is trying to stimulate growth, was 100% the right problem to deal with. And I want to see from the government an attempt to try and deal with that. Now, so far, they've said they've stabilised things, and I think Jeremy Hunt does deserve credit, and Rishi Sunak.
So he shouldn't be reshuffled out. There's been reports he should be reshuffled.
I was the last chancellor to be sacked, and it didn't end very well for the Prime Minister. So I would suggest a caution on that front. I don't think Prime Ministers sacking chancellors is a good omen, even though, to be fair to Rishi, he didn't appoint Jeremy Hunt. It was Liz Truss who appointed him. So I think that they've done the first bit. They've shown a measure of restraint. They've shown balance. And now, as we go into the election, we have to give something. We have to say that this is the forward plan. this is how we're actually going to
Because when the
grow
Chancellor
economy.
says, well, we can't afford tax cuts, what's your response to that? Because
Well,
it's a legitimate concern, isn't it? And we've got household debt now exceeding
Sure.
$2 trillion for the very first time. That's equivalent to $71,000 per household. Is it just a case that successive governments have been far too profligate with taxpayers' cash?
So I think the big issue, which no one wants to address, is public spending. Public spending is very, very high. And it doesn't take a mathematician to work out if your public spending is growing at 3% a year and your economy is growing at 0.5% a year, how are you going to pay for the public spending? And the answer so far has been through more tax. That's why we've got a very, very high tax burden. Our attempt to reduce that, which spooked the markets, frankly, was perhaps too much too quickly. It was too much to digest.
But does Jeremy Hunt need to do some of that?
So I think there has to be a balance.
And which aspects would you like to?
I think, well, I mean, he could look at a whole range of things. And it's not just about reducing public spending, it's about reducing the rate at which the public spending increases. I know it's a slightly difficult concept, but, you know, you have to try and have some restraint in order to kind of reduce the spending need.
But if
otherwise,
you call for restraint, you'll be accused of austerity too.
all of those things,
right?
I mean, that's the political. But the dilemma is that if you're spending more than you're getting in, you have to put up taxes, and that's the doom loop.
But if you're spending more than, exactly. But then if they are spending more than they're bringing in, then the argument for tax cuts is erroneous, isn't it? Because people will then say, well, no, you can't afford to do that either.
No. So what you have to do is, and he actually mentioned this in his autumn statement, which was what I was going to do. What we did in the mini budget was that we had the tax measures, and then we were going to announce the spending measures, but we didn't get that far. But what he has to do is to try and present a case for spending restraint.
Yes.
And also trying to put more money into the economy by reducing taxes.
Any tax, which one should he cut first?
Well, there are a whole range of taxes.
Are you talking about income? Are you talking about corporation?
My own favoured view was to start off, which is what Liz campaigned on, in terms of the corporation tax.
Yes.
And then I think we tried to do too much in the mini budget. I think if we just focused...
So maybe start with business tax.
Yes, I think it has to be sequenced.
Do you feel that businesses in this country are being hammered by a Conservative government? Because that's how they seem to feel.
I think going from 19% to 25% in corporation tax is very challenging.
Yes.
And also, we want to make your economy attractive. I mean, in Ireland, they have, what, 12% corporation tax?
Well, we were meant to be more competitive after Brexit, right?
Well,
we weren't meant to be on a par with France and Germany.
No, and in Ireland, the top rate of tax is 40%. Whereas in our country, the corporation tax is 25%, and the top rate of tax is 45%. So if you're a successful businessman, you can see why they might want to go to Ireland instead of the UK.
We talked about government debt, we talked about household debt. You've told me about your own mortgage.
Yeah.
Are you worried that there is a generation or caucus of people that are just so mortgaged to the eyeballs that it's a massive problem coming down the track? I mean, we've already seen house prices fall.
Yeah.
Are we facing another housing crisis?
No, I think it's too easy to say that we're going to go down to the road of sort of housing Armageddon. I don't think that's the case. I think there's still a huge amount of demand for properties. There's still a sense that we're not building enough homes.
People have got extraordinary amounts of mortgage debt, haven't they?
Yes.
And what happens further down the line? Are these people saving for their pensions? Is the property their pension?
So all I would say about that is that the situation is bad. I mean, older viewers, not even that old viewers, but the early 90s, we had, what, 15% interest rates? And that was punitive. I don't think there's any risk of that, actually. But I think what we've got to try and do is we've got to build more housing where we can do that and increase the supply.
But what's your feeling on where interest rates will go? I note that you're on a tracker. Does that mean that you're thinking that they might stay at 5 and come down?
I think they will. Put it this way: I think they've gone up more than they're going to go up in the future.
Right.
But where the optimal point is, rather the highest point is a matter of speculation. I mean, I'm sure you've got Roger Bootle coming in.
Yeah.
He'll have his.
I'll ask him the same question. There's this perception, perhaps, that interest rates now will forever remain at 4 or 5% and never go back to that 0 or close to 0.
I think it's very unlikely they'll go back to 0.1%. I mean, even at the time, we realised that was exceptional. But I think they can go back down to 2 or 3%. They have done in the past. And they might do again in the future.
And final question, Kwasi, do you think the Prime Minister will hit this inflation target to halve it by the end of the year?
I think it's quite tricky. We're August now. We'll see what the July figure is. I think it'll be nip and tuck, as they say, touch and go, whether he hits that. But I think it's coming down. but obviously not as quickly as many of us would like to see.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Lovely to speak to you. Now let's go back to Bournemouth, where Olivia Utley is with the People's Panel. Delighted to find out what they've made of the interviews, not least because I hope they noted that I did insert their questions into my questions to the guests.
Well, absolutely. We've been watching very closely here in Bournemouth. I've seen a few nods, a few shakes of the head, the odd chuckle of disbelief even from our two panellists today, Dave and Steve. Dave, I'm going to start with you there because Camilla put a few of your questions to the panellists on the show. She talked to Robert Jenrick about the pull factors that you mentioned, those immigrants coming over to the UK because they get such a wealth of benefits when they come here as opposed to other European countries. Did you feel that he answered your question properly?
No, I think he glossed over it. I mean, if you look at the pro-immigration lobby groups, they advertise the pull factors for the UK. Care for Calais is one example of that. They go over to France and they introduce shopping lists and say this is what you can get if you come to the UK. Now obviously they're private organisations, they're entitled to do that. If you actually go onto the UK government website in regards to immigration benefits, even the UK government are still producing this shopping list of all the benefits that people coming across the channel will receive. So I don't think they're doing themselves any favours by proactively advertising these pull factors.
I think there are plenty of people who would agree with you on that. And Steve, what about you? I know that you're a sort of disillusioned former Conservative member. What did you make of what Robert Jenrick had to say about the immigration situation?
Well, Robert Jenrick was a former housing minister, and housing's my background, and we've had 15 housing ministers and they've not done anything about the housing crisis. So as far as him doing anything about the immigration crisis, the jury's out. If one of the pull factors that we've been mentioning, nobody ever says how many of these people that come over illegally are actually ultimately, when they're processed, allowed to remain. I've been told it's over 90%. If it's over 90% are ultimately allowed to remain and less than 5% that are ultimately deported, if I was a people smuggler, I'd be in France saying, pay me a few £1,000s, come across the channel, you'll be put in a hotel or somewhere for 2 years, and then you've got a 95% chance of actually being allowed to stay in the country anyway. So if I was one of those people affected by that, I'll be saying, yes, please, here's the money.
Absolutely. I'm going to do a bit of ping pong here. Back to you again. There was talk there, as you will have noticed, Camilla asked your question about the Just Stop Oil links with Labour to Stephen Timms. Did what he said sort of reassure you at all? You seem to be shaking your head.
No, he dodged that question, absolutely. And I think, you know, fair play to the government. They've distanced themselves from Greenpeace, and that's thanks to the environmental minister. She did that clearly last week. And I think the Labour Party could do themselves a big favour by distancing themselves and shunning all connections with anything that's related to Just Stop Oil.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's easier said than done when they need that money. And back to you for our final question, Steve. You have a background in housing, don't you? You're a retired CEO of a housing association. Yeah. Kwasi Kwarteng said there that he doesn't think there is going to be a housing Armageddon. What do you make of that?
Well, I would tend to disagree with him to the extent that in the early 90s that he was on about, property prices were a lot lower, so interest rates could be a lot higher because people were paying proportionately less. Now, everybody's paying a lot more for the properties, so if interest rates go up, they've got a lot less disposable income. In the early 90s, I was a homelessness officer for the Borough of Poole, and I was constantly putting people in bed and breakfast. I can see in about a year or so's time, when all this kicks off, we're going to be having a lot more of the same. And I understand at the moment there's more children in temporary accommodation at the moment than there ever has been before since records began. So I can only see it getting worse before it gets better.
Thank you very much. A pretty stark message to finish off there. Could we be looking at another homelessness crisis like the 1990s again? So this was our People's Panel in Bournemouth. Fantastic to hear from them, as always. Now back to you in the studio.
Thanks so much for that, Olivia. Don't you notice how our People's panellists often speak more sense than the politicians we have appearing on the show, with no disrespect to the politicians? But there is a clarity of thought among our People's panellists which is unparalleled on any other show in broadcasting. So there you have it. Now, don't go anywhere, because next we're going to be hearing from the leading economist Roger Bootle about the state of the British economy. And I'm also going to be speaking to Tory veteran Sir John Redwood, the former head of Margaret Thatcher's policy unit, find out what Thatcher might have made of net zero. And on that subject, here's the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So after an unsettled start to the weekend, things do look better for the second half of the weekend as Storm Anthony moves away to the east, putting us in this northwesterly airflow. So bringing us some showers today, but also plenty of sunny spells. For many, it will be a dry day. Those showers will be mostly focused down the central spine of the UK, heaviest across Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. We could also see the odd rumble of thunder, though with the lighter winds still brisk down some eastern coasts, feeling more pleasant than it did on Saturday. So as we go through this evening, those showers will continue for a time, but becoming increasingly confined to northern areas, with clear spells developing elsewhere. And with those light winds, that could mean we see the odd patch of mist and fog for some southern and eastern areas. But temperatures will drop a little bit more readily again tonight, so more widely a chilly night, with temperatures in rural areas dropping into single figures. So a fresh, bright start to the new week. We will see a few showers developing again, mostly across the northern half of the UK. Plenty of brightness in the southwest at first, but clouds starting to move into the afternoon as we get the next low pressure system moving in, and once again feeling pleasant in the sunshine.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And action.
Sergeant, we're being greeted by superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Thank you for joining me this morning. Now, I've got the perfect guest in the studio to help us get our heads around what's going on with the British economy. Interest rates now at a 15-year high. Roger Bootle, the Senior Independent Advisor to Capital Economics, joins me now, a leading economist, an expert on all these matters, Roger. First of all, you might have seen my interview earlier with Kwasi Kwarteng. What's your reaction to what he's saying there? He's talking about bringing government spending down, corporation tax cut, stimulating growth in a different way. Do you agree with that analysis?
Yes, I do, actually. It's a shame that he's come to that realisation now, as it were, and we had that botched experiment before.
Yes.
But I think he's largely right.
And what should Jeremy Hunt do in the autumn statement, do you think?
Well, I think he's boxed in, really, by what he's done before and by what he's said before. He's not going to cut corporation tax, is he? And I don't suppose he's going to cut government spending.
But he should. I mean, he's not going to because it looks politically weak. But as far as businesses are concerned, I mean, what are you hearing from businesses? Because in a journalistic capacity, I'm hearing businesses tearing their hair out, thinking it's more difficult than ever to start a business, let alone to keep it afloat. There's been lots of handouts for individuals when it comes to help with energy bills. We got the Federation of Small Businesses, I think, last month saying that 100,000 businesses face going under this winter because of their own energy bills. Has the Tory government, the so-called government of business, been found wanting when it comes to helping businesses?
Yes, is I think the answer.
Yeah.
But, you know, the big issue is the macroeconomy, and you don't solve those problems by, frankly, dishing out handouts, although we have been doing that over the last few years in various ways. I suspect he's going to have to do very little, actually, in this autumn statement. It's a case of just trying to keep the ship afloat, keeping it steady, and hoping that things pan out OK. Now, I'm actually reasonably pessimistic, unfortunately, about the outlook for interest rates and inflation.
Right.
I think it'll take a lot longer for that to come right. But they've got to hope that that is going to come right. Where I very much agreed with Kwasi was on public spending. You know, you can't square this circle unless you get to grips with public spending. And the obvious one to do something about is HS2.
Scrap it?
Yes.
Even though we've already spent billions on it?
There's a well-known rule in economics: you must let bygones be bygones. All rational decisions are forward-looking. Forget what you've spent.
Right.
Look at what the position is now. Going forward, what are the advantages? And I think they're pretty slender, and the costs are still rising.
That's the first loss is your best loss theory. When it comes to government spending in general, though, and also in terms of household debt, I was intrigued to read a piece that you wrote recently for The Telegraph. We headlined it, "Forget sky-high debt, the real economic danger is a lack of growth." But that's not to say that you're not worried about sky-high debt, are you, Roger?
You're absolutely right. Because as you all know, being a columnist yourself, one of the problems is you've got no control over the headlines.
I know. Well, we do tend to put quite sensational headlines on things so people click on the story. But to explain that to me, though, sky-high debt is a problem, but it's not as big a problem as the lack of growth in this country. Is that the premise?
Yes. Well, there are a couple of strands to this. The first is that people keep talking about the national debt. It's not really the national debt at all. It's the public debt. It's the debt of the government, the state, to everyone else. Most of those everyone else are, in fact, other British people or pension funds, insurance companies, or whatever. So that's the first thing.
Yes.
People think this is, vast debt owed by the country. It's not. And the second thing is, we've been here before. After the Napoleonic Wars, which I don't myself remember, the debt was something like 260% of GDP, as opposed to around about 100 we're at now. And also after the Second World War, it was around about that. So we've been there before, we worked it down. Working it down means maintaining confidence, keeping down government spending, keeping the deficit down so the debt doesn't keep building up. But the most important thing is having the economy growing. And as the economy grows, that enables you to put up with what is too high a level of debt.
But then I remember Ronald Reagan famously quoted as saying the deficit is big enough to look after itself. And yet at the same time, Reaganomics is associated with a period of high growth in the US. So how do you square that circle? Because he wasn't worried about the deficit.
Well, no, and in the end, of course, America didn't actually get out of its financial problems. I mean, that worked for a time, that policy. And Truss, of course, was following exactly that rubric. I think there are big limits to this, and particularly for an economy like the UK, which is much more vulnerable than the US. You can't just say, to hell with the deficit, we're going to cut taxes anyway. I think the objective of cutting taxes is absolutely right. But to do that in a sustainable way in this economy, you've got to tackle government spending. And that was the big mistake, I think, under Truss.
And what about productivity? Because I think a key concern from people watching and listening to this is that we just aren't as productive as we used to be. Also, this move towards work from home perhaps has adversely affected productivity. I don't know what your take is on that, Roger.
Yes, I think it probably has. This is a problem, of course, we've had for a long time. It's got worse for a variety of reasons. Regulation is one.
We're over-regulated.
We're over-regulated and regulated in the wrong way. The public sector is, I think, by and large, a baleful influence across the whole economy, and its own productivity is pretty poor.
Because the public sector is too large?
It is too large, absolutely. Interferes too much and is, my own experience confirms, is deeply inefficient.
Yes.
But on working from home, it's, of course, been a great benefit for a number of people, but I don't think it's been great for productivity, no.
And when Kwasi talked about, you think he's more optimistic than you're going to be about this debt mountain, particularly people's mortgage debt catching up with them. Are you worried about a time bomb waiting to explode? Because you also wrote a piece for us where you said, again, it might not be your headline, but this was the thrust of the article, Britain's property wealth boom is an illusion, and the national fixation with the housing ladder ignores fundamental flaws in the market. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant was this is really a dichotomy between wealth as it appears to individuals and their families, and, as it were, wealth for the country as a whole. If you don't do anything to your property, you just sit there and live in it, and the price goes up 3 or 4 times, which is what is the experience of millions of ordinary people in this country, you feel richer. And indeed, in some senses, you are richer. In some senses, when you, at the end of your life, you move down or whatever, or sell the house or leave it to your children, then that's wealth that you can use. But if you ask yourself the question, what has that done to the real wealth of the country, the fact that your wealth has gone up 3 or 4 times the paper wealth of in the house? And the answer is, it's done nothing at all. 39 Acacia Avenue, Croydon, is still doing exactly what it did before. That's to say, it sits there and it provides housing services. So there's an illusion. And people think that constantly rising house prices are, in some sense or other, making the country better off. They're not.
All right. What do you think is going to happen to interest rates over the course of the next year to 18 months? Stay level or come down?
The honest answer is I don't know, but my fear is they're going to have to go up some more. I've on record as saying I think the peak will be something like about 6%.
Right.
I don't know. It depends, of course, on what happens to inflation. But I think inflation is going to be quite obstinate. And the bank will have to, I think, get tougher.
Do you think the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey's been doing a good job? What's your analysis of his performance in office so far, Roger?
Well, look, it's a very tough job. It's a very tough job
indeed. You're caveating your answer.
No, it's a very tough job. He hasn't excelled, but it's not just him. It's the other members of the committee.
Excelled?
It's the other members of the committee.
Right.
It's not just him, don't forget. He's just one voice on the committee. He has one vote. You know, point to the others on the committee who've been
But what's the problem with the committee? They're too left-leaning, they're too kind of prone to Treasury orthodoxy, that they are managing decline rather than stimulating growth. Just characterise what's wrong with this committee.
Well, their big mistake was not to spot inflation rising on the horizon when some other people outside could. And that's, I think, nothing whatever to do with left-wing politics. It's to do with their take on economics, if you like, and the way they observe the economy, and the Bank of England model was next to useless. So I think there's been something wrong with the quality and behaviour and nature of the people on the committee, and in particular, it was too much in one vein of one intellectual approach. We need some mavericks on that committee.
good point upon which to end. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Roger Bootle. We need more Mavericks. We need more Mavericks in general, I would suggest. Talking of Mavericks, we're going to be speaking to John Redwood next. Don't go anywhere. That's Margaret Thatcher's favourite MP and her former policy advisor. We'll be back in a jiffy.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, it's the interview I've been waiting for, you've been waiting for. Sir John Redwood joins me now. I've described him as Margaret Thatcher's favourite MP. I think there's somebody behind me, Marco Portillo, who's preparing for a show that objects to me using that. So I should say, John, you're one of her favourite MPs. And what I'd love to know from you is what you think Thatcher might have made of net zero.
Well, as a scientist worried about the environment, she would have taken the scientific advice very seriously, but she would not have adopted policies in Britain which singled us out for particular punishment, but left the world with more CO2 as a result. She would not have been a fan of any policy which banned things in Britain, leading to imports which gave you more CO2 because of the transport to get the goods into Britain. And in the case of gas, of course, doubly damaging, because you import gas in liquefied form, where an awful lot of extra energy is being used to liquefy it and then to convert it back into gas as well as for the transport. So she would have seen how foolish that policy was. I'm very glad the government has now recognised that we should get out more of our own oil and gas all the time. We need fossil fuels, but I think they also need to review their work on the motor industry, because we're in grave danger of killing our own motor industry. And then a lot of people after 2030 will be queuing up to buy nearly new imported petrol and diesel cars because they're not convinced about the electric versions.
Should they stop this ban from 2030 on the new diesels and petrols, John? Should the government just pause that policy?
Yes. They should pause that policy, as the European Union has done, and the European Union is particularly enthusiastic about net zero policies, as we know, but they see that it's going to kill the German motor industry. But the other thing they need to do urgently, this government, is to suspend the policy of taxing companies from next year if they don't sell enough electric cars and sell too many petrol and diesel cars. It's a crazy disincentive to any manufacturer to come to Britain, and a particular barrier for our industry at a time when it needs support and help. The industry is crying out to lift that. So I would urge the government to do that immediately. We also need to review the whole nexus of extra taxes on business. It's not just the big increase in corporation tax, but it's the extra penalties on drug suppliers to the NHS. It's the windfall taxes on oil and gas, which were imposed when oil and gas prices were hugely higher than they are today, but they didn't, of course, define a windfall properly, and so they're still charging the same windfall tax even though the prices have come down a long way again.
In your mind, what should corporation tax be set at?
12.5%, along with the Irish. I think the Irish have got this right. I mean, as I've been explaining to the government for several years, the Irish collect 4 times as much tax per head from business tax than we do by setting a rate which is now half our level. And we've watched as Ireland has attracted massive American investment, particularly in the digital industries, the really exciting growth area of the world economy. And much of that investment would probably come to Britain if we'd had the same corporation tax rate as the Republic of Ireland.
Yes. As a staunch Brexiteer, are you as frustrated as other people who voted for Leave in 2016 that the government hasn't done enough to maximise some of our post-Brexit opportunities?
Well, indeed. I and like-minded MPs are constantly bombarding the government with idea after idea of how we can take advantage of these great freedoms. But there's been a marked reluctance, particularly at the Treasury. So let's take the case of VAT. There was a tax imposed by the European Union and some of its revenues taken by the European Union, ripe for reform, but we still haven't permanently abolished VAT on all green products, for example, which you'd have thought was a no-brainer. We haven't raised the VAT threshold for small business, and your previous guest was reinforcing your point that it's very difficult setting up and growing a small business in Britain, more than it should be. And one of the big barriers is that as soon as you hit 85,000 of turnover, you then have to register for VAT and put your prices up by 20%. Well, that's too soon. Why not raise the threshold to 250,000? We'd immediately get a growth in capacity and activity, because there are a lot of businesses that stop trading when they get to the 85,000.
When you make this point to the Chancellor, does he listen?
Well, yes, he's always very polite and he always listens, but he obviously doesn't agree.
He listens and ignores.
The Treasury orthodoxy defends every bit of VAT they've got at the moment. And of course, it was the Treasury orthodoxy which, for example, gave George Osborne the idea of increasing VAT on things that people just thought were outrageous. And that blew up in his face. Now, there has to be a remodelling of VAT, and we need taxes that make sense for Britain to promote more growth. Because as Roger Bootle was rightly saying, if you get more growth, the deficit will come down faster than if you go for the recessionary model.
Yes.
The Bank of England has behaved extremely badly in the last 3 or 4 years because its model doesn't work. It now accepts that its model doesn't work. Yes. Its forecasts have been wildly inaccurate, both on inflation and on growth, and yet they're still making these regular calls about hiking interest rates up when they know their forecasts don't work. And in these latest August forecasts, they tell us there is a 90% probability that unemployment in 3 years' time will be somewhere between 2% and 8%. Well, yes, I agree with that, But that's highs and lows for the decade.
So, John, I think we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid.
A very different policy if unemployment was about to halve to 2%.
OK, John.
Than the policy you would follow if it's about to double.
John Redwood, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Now, up next, it's Michael Portillo. I'll be back at next week at 9:30. But first, here's some more weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So after an unsettled start to the weekend, things do look better for the second half of the weekend as Storm Anthony moves away to the east, putting us in this northwesterly airflow. So bringing us some showers today, but also plenty of sunny spells. For many, it will be a dry day. Those showers will be mostly focused down the